So, in the first presentation, I will try to give you an idea of what we started seeing yesterday concerning a way to derive the different orders within the noun phrase through the movement of the core of the nominal projection, namely the NP, and I will try to generalize it to the sentence, to, in fact, should be to all phrases that make up sentences. So PPs, adverbial phrases, and so on. The second presentation is completely different, and it will deal with the syntax of adjectives. I will compare in particular English with Italian, or English and Germanic with Romance, and Russian and Slavic languages are virtually identical to English. Not exactly, but they tend very much like Germanic, at least better than just English. So let me start. I hope you just, I mean, I want just to give the logic of the idea. Don't worry if it may appear a little complex in terms of movements, and I try to say something about the general problem that word order also typologically raises for any account of word order across languages. So traditionally, both in the generative and also the typological tradition, the question of word order has been taken as what we might call a macro parameter. That is to say, something that you decide once for all, in a sense, in the best of possible cases, in the well-behaved languages, where you can say complements precede the heads of which they are complements, so the verb or the noun or the preposition, in so-called head final languages like Japanese, let's say. And on the other hand, complements follow the core, the noun, the verb, the preposition in head initial languages, like one can say SVO languages like English or Italian, but these are actually very mixed languages. So the most well-behaved head initial languages, as I'm trying to say, would be what also Greenberg focalized on, namely VSO and VOS languages. But I'll come back to that. Now, so I was saying that rather than approaching this question in terms of a macro parameter, I will try to approach it in terms of what are called sometimes micro parameters. Namely, there are differences among languages that sometimes are tied to words. We will see a very striking case of one such case where in English, for example, modifiers of adjectives generally precede the adjective, like in final languages. So you say a very nice, so nice, too nice, and so on, except for one, enough, which allows only the order good enough, nice enough, where the order is determined by this modifier of the adjective. That's the limiting case of only one word that is, which has an instruction to locate its modifie, the thing that it modifies, in one direction rather than in the unmarked direction of the language. So generalizing to the worst case, as Montague would say, I would try to use instructions in the lexicon in the ultimate analysis to see if we can really go into accounting for the differences among languages with respect to word orders. Now, the fact that we might approach word order in this way, namely in a microparametric, where words or different words give instructions as to whether their complements or their modifiers are to the left or to the right, is, I think, finds some plausibility in a number of facts, namely the fact that no language seems to be totally consistent. Even the most rigid head final languages like Japanese and Korean have some inconsistencies, namely something that does not really fit with the generalized word order of the language, the head final type. And there is even a more striking fact, which is actually a kind of a paradox, which I don't have any clue for, namely the fact that languages which come closest to the most consistent types, namely Japanese and Korean, or some Dravidian languages for head final languages, or Malagasy, some other Tunisian languages for the head initial type, the VOS languages are a minority of the languages of the world. We'll come back to that point. So, before getting to that, though, I want to consider some very general issues of the head final, head initial word orders. And as I had already suggested at some point, I think we should try to reconstruct the two ideal orders. It's as if we have a system that, if it applies blindly, will give you on one side the head initial, on the other side the head final. Imagine a system that, if it runs blindly without any impediments, will give you the two ideal types. And we can reconstruct, I think, the two ideal types by looking at the rigid, what Greenberg used to call rigid SOV languages, and their mirror image, which Greenberg did not term in terms of rigid head initial, but which are the mirror image, so the opposite of the rigid SOV, namely the VOS type of languages, like Malagasy or Tongan or a few others. I think that the reasons to try to reconstruct the ideal orders, although it's a kind of exercise in a sense that we are doing, because most languages are not ideal, and yet I think it's a good way to proceed to try to reconstruct exactly what it would mean to be a perfect head final language and a perfect head initial language, for at least three reasons. First, because there are some clear tendencies that come from Greenberg's work, and especially from later work by Veneman, Lehmann, Hawkins, Dreyer, who have actually tried to generalize Greenberg's results, trying to see whether one could come up with very general statements. Yet, every one of them faced the problem that many languages were irregular. Nonetheless, there are clear tendencies, as we will see, so that's one of the reasons why we should try to get an idea what the ideal types are. The second reason is that because the reconstruction of the ideal orders and the way they can be derived may constitute a kind of metric, like a measure, on the basis of which we can measure the distance of each language from a standard. So suppose that the standard is the ideal head final or the ideal head initial, then we can compute how many lines of distance one language has with respect to the standard. And the third reason, I think, has to do with the fact that if we think that linguistic theory should also try to account for language acquisition, and that the child does not start from scratch. He comes with very many expectations about what is found in a language. So it could be Chinese or Italian or whatever. So if it started from scratch, he would never learn a language. So it comes with very great expectations. And to know what the standard is and what the deviations can be on the basis of the system, then may help a lot to learn a language. So that's the third. So let me now get into the handout, where I start by giving you the ideal orders, which can be more clearly seen in what I call the rigid at final and rigid at initial. So the generalization seems to be the following. I mean, many of you are experts on particular languages, so you should be able to see how close these languages come to the rigid head or ideal head final and ideal head initial. So if you look in Roman 1 under 1.1, the head final type, the generalization seems to be the following. All higher heads, by that I mean functional heads that select complements of various types, so complementizers that select, let's say, a tense phrase, and tense which selects aspectual phrases, and aspects which select VPs. These come to the to the right of the core, namely the verb, as you see with an examples from Evenki, under 1a, you see that the past tense, then the habitual aspect and the imperfective aspect are to the right of the verb in an order which is the opposite, one could say, of the order of these elements when they appear before the verb. So tense is higher than aspect, and this means that it's most to the rightmost. There is also agreement, which we can leave out, and it's rightmost with respect to aspect and the verb. Whereas all phrasal specifiers, arguments, DPs, PPs, and adverbial phrases, all kinds of circumstantials, are to the left of the verb, and they seem to be ordered in the way they are introduced in the skeleton of the sentence. So if you had, for example, an epistemic adverbial, this would come before an habitual adverbial, which would come before a manner adverbial, which is closer to the verb. So in that sense, I say that the order of elements that precede the verb reflect directly the order in which these are introduced in the sentence. And in 2, you see that there is a similar arrangement in the nominal phrase, where all the phrases, demonstrative, relative clauses, numeral phrase, various adjective phrases, this is just a fragment, very tiny fragment, they precede in the scope order, in a sense, in the way these elements are introduced, with the demonstratives being leftmost, they are the highest, and adjectives rightmost before the noun, and they are closer to the noun. Whereas if you look at what in the nominal phrase are heads, apparently these are determiners, number, like plural, dual, and case, and they seem to be ordered in the mirror image. So case is the highest, and it's the rightmost. The determiner is very high, and it comes next. And number is lower, and it's closer to the noun. So that seems to be the generalization. that, at least for the well-behaved head final language. Now, for the head initial, you have the mirror image. So all higher functional heads, so complementizer, tense, aspect, precede the verb. So when you say it's a predicate initial language or a verb initial language, in fact, it's not really initial, because there are things that precede the lexical verb in this head initial languages, like a complementizer if there is, some tense particle and some aspectual particle, and so on. Whereas all the phrases are to the right, and they appear in the reverse order of the way in which they are introduced, with epistemic adverbs coming last, as opposed, we will see an example later, later than manner adverbs, which are closer to the noun. And a similar thing goes on for the nominal phrase. So one can get in page 2 to the overarching generalization, which says that the property which both head initial and head final word orders have in common is that whatever precedes the verb or the noun or the adjective reflects the order of introduction of these elements, whereas whatever follows is in the mirror image order. And we saw that the two types of languages differ as to what they have to the right, what they have to the left. So they also differ in that respect. So let's skip 5. We saw yesterday that there is some reason to assume that what you see to the, if you look at 5a, let's say, if you look at to the right of the noun, it's not things that belong together, but they are interspersed within or among the elements that appear on the other side. So it's not that they make up two camps where plural, determiner, case are close together, but they seem to come in between the elements that appear on the other side. That's the challenge. How do we manage to get this segregation? Segregation means that if we start from something that reflects the scope of these elements, which we would like to, because all languages seem to be governed by the same scope relation. So in a sentence, if you look at 7a and b, or 7a, in a sentence, complementizer are highest. Then you have epistemic adverbs, which are higher than tense. I didn't put tense there, but I put a modal verb. And modal verbs are higher than adverbs of manner, and then you have the lexical verb. Yet, what happens, if you look now at 6, the ideal head final type has the order that you see in 6a, where the modal verb and the complementizer end up, let's say, to the right, whereas the adverbials end up to the left, although they are, as you see, interspersed. And in head initial, you find the exact mirror image, namely the complementizer and the modal precede in that order, which is the opposite of the order of a head final language. And to the right of the verb, you also have manner adverb and epistemic adverbs, which follow in that order, which is the opposite of the order that you have pre-verbally in head final languages. So there is kind of a mirror image, mirror effect in the two types of languages. Yesterday I was saying, if you turn the page 3, that one might try not to have movements of any sort come into play and say, well, maybe we have simply a symmetrical introduction of these elements to the right and to the left of the lexical verb, as you see in 8a and 8b, which may still reflect their scope relations. So a modal, let's say an epistemic modal, is certainly higher than a manner adverb. And in many languages, manner adverbs end up on one side of the verb, and epistemic modals end up on the other side. So, yet there are cases, as you see in 9a, with 9b as an illustration, where this symmetrical way of introducing these elements in a way that reflects their scope relation is known well behaved. You have a crossing of lines which is not allowed in the system of tree or graph that is generally assumed. And 10a with 10b as another case shows you that you don't always have the mirror image. Case should be last. Yet in some languages it's not last, and for example in classical Armenian it's followed by the plural marker, which is unexpected from if it were again a pure symmetrical generation. So what I will try to show, although don't get carried away or carried off by all the movements that you are going to see, and just imagine the logic of the matter. It's something that still needs some work to do because there are some complications that I cannot get into and I'm not sure I can resolve. But the idea is to try to devise a system which employs, as we saw yesterday, movement, which buys you things. I mean, yesterday we saw that we could, by utilizing movements that are independently motivated, like the pipe pipings that we saw of the whose picture or picture of whom, and here is the same thing, we could try to derive out of the 24 possible orders of demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and noun, only the orders that are attested, 14, and not derive the 10 which are never found. So a system should be devised that demarcates what is attested from what is not attested. And the more ambitious thing was to derive also the numerosity of the languages that differentiate the different orders, but that's a separate question and a much more complicated question. So I won't even try to enter this question with the sentences, which you can imagine how many things there are in a sentence and how many different orders are found in different languages. Although there is a system that by combining different modes of pipe piping may give you different orders. But now I discuss only the ideal type. So the assumption that I make here in 11 is that there are verbal heads, which are the usual ones, like a lexical verb, a spectral verb, a modal verb, an auxiliary, tense, particle or verb, and complementizer. These are the typical heads. And then, and the nominal I leave out now. And then every projection that contains verb material, I say, is endowed with one of the two pipe piping features. So it's like an instruction that says, activate a functional projection that allows you to move in something from, you remember yesterday what I said, and I just recall this because it's that when you have, let's say, a root modal, and then you have a root adverbial corresponding to the same modal. So, for example, a deontic modal, like in German, we saw yesterday, müssen, and then also the adverbial that goes with müssen. and they are not adjacent, although one is a modifier of the other. Or let's say in English, like possibly may. This is not an epistemic, but an alethic kind of modal, and possibly it's the corresponding adverbial. And remember that I said that I once believed that they could be in the same projection, one modifying as a specifier the head. But this is not true, because if you look at German or other head final languages, you find that they are separated by elements like the VP in German that moves in between the modal and the adverbial. So there seems to be always above each of the projections that have an overt element like may, possibly, or müssen, and I don't remember now what I used as from yesterday, probably you can reconstruct. Then you have a projection that is there only to allow you to move things around, or better, to move up things. And that was very clear the case in German, for example. But that's true also for other head final languages. German is a mixed kind of language, of course, but it has many head final properties, not all. But. So the idea, again, I just want to give you the general idea without entering too much into technical questions, but if you look at the head final type, recall, and I repeated it in 12a, that what you have is all the heads on one side in the mirror image of a head initial pre-verbal complementizer tense aspect, and all the phrases on the left side, on the opposite side, even though, as I said, they are interspersed. So the system must give you this as a result, namely to tease apart the heads on one side and all the phrases on the other side. And what I'm trying to show in 13 is that you begin by, in a head final type, by using the regressive piping case that we saw. So here, the head, which is within, I didn't put it, the VP, is the engine, so to speak, of the movement, but it moves not only the V, but it carries along under the pictures of whom. Remember that in the pictures of whom, what you move is something bigger than whom, and in particular, something which is above whom. Technical term is sequence whom, and then you move that. And here it's the same. Instead of whom, you have plus V, which is the engine of the movement rather than the WH feature, and it pipes the manner adverb phrase to this intermediate position. And then, again, it moves under the same, across the, when it encounters another head of the same type, it has to cross over. That is the logic of the matter. So it pipes not things that are not heads, and when it encounters a head, it crosses over the next head, which then becomes the engine of the movement. So once you have moved the adverb, phrase, manner, and VP to the left of the modal verb, and you have an intermediate order there, which is adverbial of manner, VP, modal verb, then it's the modal verb that takes over and moves in the same way, moves with the picture of whom piping to one of these empty projections, but more crucially, across the next head. So that by doing that, the result is that you don't reverse the phrases, you only reverse the heads. because it's the heads that are the engines, so to speak, of these kind of movements. So that is the general idea, although maybe it's not entirely clear, but and so this is what I showed. I mean, I said concerning also 16, where once you, I mean, let's keep the nominal phrase because that's similar and it's only going to make things more complex. Now, what about the head initial type? Now, the head initial type has the same logic of movements, but of the other type of pipe piping, which means, if you remember, of the whose picture type, namely, the element that is the engine of the movement, the WH in the whose picture, or the verb, or a verbal head, either the lexical verb or the modal verb or the complementizer, which are all heads of the verbal type. These are the engines of the various movements of the whose picture type. So here, the V in 20A crosses over. Now it does not pipe in the manner that we saw earlier, piping what is found above it, but crosses over this element, piping whatever is to its right. There is nothing there because the verb is the only element occupying, let's say, the VP, for simplicity. So it moves over there, and then it keeps on moving with the same whose picture piping. Namely, it moves by dragging along whatever is to its right. So there, what moves now is the FP1 to which the VP is raised. And it goes on raising across the next verbal head by piping the manner adverb. So in this case, what you have, once you have done the movement indicated in 20A, would be the order V, adverb manner, modal verb. But then now, remember that the engine, once you encounter another verbal head, that takes over. And it's now the new engine, so to speak, that has to move, and it moves with the same principle, namely the whose picture piping that you see in 20B. So there is nothing there, so only the modal verb crosses over. And if you turn the page, 20B, then it keeps moving by dragging along all the elements that it crossed over. So the modal verb in 20D is in front of the V and the manner adverb, and has to cross over the epistemic adverb, because it cannot drag it along because it would be a piping of the picture of whom type, and so it moves with the other type, and will give you an order that is modal verb, verb, adverb manner, and adverb epistemic because of this movement. And this is what you, almost what you find, except you have to change modal with past. In 20E, you have this VSO language, you have the tense particle instead of the modal verb, which precedes the lexical verb, then it's followed by the manner adverb, and last comes the epistemic adverb, which clearly takes scope above everything, yet it's the last element. So remember what I said yesterday, that epistemic adverbs take scope even over the tense, and yet you find it at the very end, these well-behaved head initial languages. And then you do the same thing, crossing over the complementizer, and then the complementizer finally crosses over, giving you the order complementizer, modal, verb, and then all the adverbs to the other side. Now, this leaves many things out. So I haven't talked about where the arguments are, where the PPs are in this. You can imagine the complexity of accounting for the position of all of these other elements. But I think that there is some evidence that they come in a particular order themselves, as can be seen from ideal head initial and head final languages. 20G gives you the pre-focus movement cases of the ordering of various arguments and circumstantials in a head initial language, with the theme closest, then the goal, then the agent, then manner, instrument, location, time. There are, but this is a highly simplified, drastically simplified case, because as shown in 21, in Malagasy, for example, arguments don't occupy a single position. So, for example, the object can be found interspersed among the various adverbs, possibly with different interpretations. That's not completely clear. We know that in German and other languages that have been studied in this respect, that objects that remain closer to the verb are interpreted often as non-specific, indefinite, and as you raise them up above certain adverbs, then the obligatory interpretation becomes specific or something else. So these are not completely optional movements or locations of arguments, but they correlate possibly with different interpretations. Now, so far, as I said, I tried to give a very general way, possible way, of deriving the ideal types by, as I said, letting the system apply blindly and uniformly. That is, all these movements are of the same type. But to be able to account for the word orders in certain languages which are mixed, then one can begin to see whether you can obtain those different orders by changing the moods of the modes of movements. That's one thing that remains open. As I said, the ideal types are found only in few languages. There are many departures, and one very drastic, very clear departure is what you find, for example, in this Papuan language, Bargam, in 22, or in the Mayan language in 23, where the departure seems to involve opposites modes of piping, because you see that Bargam is head final in the sentence. Judging from the grammar of this author, Hepner, which gives the ordering sentences with the order that you see in A, 22A, but it's head initial in the nominal phrase. So the two phrases, or the clause and the nominal phrase, are completely opposite. One is head final, the other is head initial. And Tsutsojil, this Mayan language, also shows this opposite ordering in the sentence and in the nominal phrase, but here in the opposite way, because here this Mayan language is head initial in the sentence, but is head final in the nominal phrase. So these are known. Anyway, I was saying that clearly there are tendencies that one should, of different strengths, that one has to account for. So, for example, following Greenberg's terminology in terms of harmony, we can say that heads within the same extended projection, so recall what an extended projection is, it's made up of all the heads and also the modifiers, but let's say the heads that belong to a certain lexical element. So for verbs, you have heads like aspect, tense, complementizer. For the noun, we saw you have number, you have determiner, you have case. And in the case of the sentence, judging from Dreyer's article in 1992, which made a survey of various word orders, we actually see that there are some clear tendencies, because the modal verbs and the auxiliaries and the subordinating conjunctions seem to be verb patterners. Namely, in OV languages, they follow the verb. So you have more genera in OV with following modal, then you have, that's 24a, then you have in OV language, then you have as genera in 24c with a modal that precedes the verb. There are languages, of course, that are mixed in that sense, but the number of genera that instantiate this disharmony are fewer than the languages that have the modal in the right position. Now, consider that it's a verb patterner in the sense that just like the verb follows its complement, so the modal follows its complement, which is the VP. And the same with auxiliaries that take the VP as a complement, or the subordinating conjunctions that take TP and VP as their complements. So clearly one has to account also for this kind of tendency. Another kind of harmony, now concerning modifiers, is the one you see in 27 that actually recalls one of the pages that we saw yesterday in the ordering of noun, adjective, numeral, and demonstrative. So as you see there, the consistent 27a and b have many more genera and also many more languages, but what's more crucial are the genera, than all the other arrangements. So it means that there are more languages that put all of the modifiers in that order on the same side of the noun. Then languages that put them on the opposite sides. And these are the 14 cases that are actually attested, but you see that there is a very drastic decline in the number of genera, the last column, of the languages that instantiate each order, and also in the number of languages, though there are some curious facts. For example, the 27e, although it is instantiated in fewer genera than 27d, so it's 49 as opposed to 53, it has a lot of languages. Maybe this is a function of the fact that more grammars with these orders are actually produced, so that one finds more orders of this type in more languages, but what counts is the genera, as we saw yesterday. There is also harmony across different extended projections. Now we are looking at not at the same projection like OV and the modal, or OV and the complementizer, which are part of the same extended projection of the verb, but we look across different projections. So, for example, prepositional phrases and VPs and verbal phrases, or nominal phrases and verbal phrases. And again, you see that there is some clear tendency. So in 28A and B, we see that the ordering of the preposition with respect to its object is the same as the ordering of the verb with respect to its object. And here we have a lot of languages. Here I took them from Waltz, so it's languages rather than genera, but there is a very clear-cut difference with languages that are incoherent, inconsistent in having the object of the verb following, but the object of the preposition preceding. That's 28C, or in 28D, the opposite case. And the same is true for the ordering of the genitive, which covers at least in greater extent the case of an object. It also covers subjects of the noun, but it's the objective genitive, it covers the object of the noun. And here again, it's interesting that the position of the genitive with respect to the noun is consistent in 29A and 29B, and here you have a lot of languages. Where it's inconsistent, so the genitive precedes while the object of the verb follows, or the genitive follows while the object of the verb precedes, then you have fewer languages. There is a much weaker, in fact, almost no harmony if you combine modifiers and complements. So if you compare where the object of the verb is and where the adjective with respect to the noun is, or the numeral with respect to the noun is, you see that a number of languages come close to being similar, especially in 31, 120, 246, 230. So there doesn't seem to be a real clear correlation if you compare modifiers with complements with respect to their ordering. So what the harmonies we saw earlier seem to be real tendencies, but there are cases where we should not try to find any particular tendency. Let me skip 32, but another less common departure is the movement without pipe piping. Remember yesterday when we saw the case of this particular order that has to come from movement of the noun without any pipe piping, so that you don't reverse the order of these elements. And this, Greenberg used to say, is a less popular order within the noun phrase, but you find the same thing within the sentence, because if you compare Italian with Malagasy, and this has been done for Italian by me, but for Malagasy in a paper by Bukowski and Travis, and also by other people, you find a complete mirror image of the adverbs that follow the verb. So in Italian, if you look at 34b, you have the presuppositional negation, mica, that we discussed yesterday. Then you have any more, or no longer. Then you have always. Then you have completely. Then you have well. So this is the normal, in fact, only possible order of these adverbs together. And as you recall from yesterday, these adverbs appear to correspond to functional heads, which are expressed on the verb by maybe suffixes, and they correspond to mostly to aspects. So you have pure terminative aspect, sempre, continuous, completamente, or completely, completive aspect, and well, it's a manner adverb, and that seems to go together with voice. But now, if you look at 34C, you find a perfect mirror order. So, according to these authors, the ordering in which you find post-verbally the same adverbials is the opposite. So here, well is closer to the verb, completely comes next, then always, then anymore or no longer, and then negation, which is absolutely the opposite ordering. And that seems to suggest that the case of Malagasy is a well-behaved case where the verb raises around the, I mean, I didn't talk about what the scope relation is between these, among these adverbs. Clearly negation is higher than the no longer adverb, which is higher than, you see it in head initial languages, where these adverbs precede the verb, and this is their typical order, where you have no longer, always, completely, well. We saw that English is almost a head final language with all of these other preceding, except for well, which has to follow. And so that even in English, the verb raises a little bit. But in Malagasy, it has to raise with the whose pictures by piping, so raising around well, then taking verb plus well around completely, then taking verb well completely around always, and so on. So reversing the entire hierarchy of adverbs. Okay, let me skip some of these further, 35 and 36, and let me begin with the microparametric approach to word order variation. Recall that even the most well-behaved head final and head initial languages, Japanese, Korean on one side, Malagasy and Tongan, and other Austronesian languages on the other side, they have inconsistencies. And what I said is the paradox is that, at least if we look at the mirror image of the rigid head initial and final languages, namely the VOS languages, for which we have some count, they are a tiny minority. So VOS languages make up 3.3% of the totality of the 5,000 languages of Hammerström's sample. So it's a real tiny minority, and even if you put them together with VSO languages, sometimes there are languages that alternate VOS and VSO, which are 9.5% in this sample, you come up to 13%, which is still a minority of, they should be 50-50 if you think of head initial and head final, but in fact, the SVO languages, which are sometimes taken to be head initial like VSO and VOS, are very mixed. I mean, there are all sorts of different types of SVO languages. As you see there, they come up to 40% of the totality, and SOV languages to 43. And even if we put together VOS, VSO, and SVO, because SVO are closer to VSO than they are to SOV, then you come to 53 as opposed to something like 43. So you come almost to the 50-50 percentage of at initial and at final. But the question is that we don't know, we don't have a corresponding number of rigid SOV languages. So Greenberg talked about rigid SOV, but didn't say how many there were. I mean, he put Japanese, Korean, Turkish, but there are many had final languages, SOV, which are not rigid at all. If you think of Hindi, it has an initial complementizer, whereas it should have a final complementizer after the verb, and so on for many others. So this makes it plausible to consider a microparametric approach, like I said, with lexical instructions of progressively larger classes of elements, so that, well, I just exemplify to give you an idea. So I already mentioned the case of enough in English, which has to be marked specifically for, this is the, we will see that there is a double job. In some cases, what determines the order is what attracts. And in other cases, it's what is attractive that determines the order lexically. Here, if you think of having to specify that enough is special with respect to all the other, like quite, very, good, so, and so on, you have to say that enough forces its modifié to raise in with the progressive by piping. So not carrying along the modifier, but overtaking the modifier, so that good changes places with enough. Another case, for example, is in Italian in 38, where certain adjectives, for example, old, in the of long-standing interpretation, friend of long-standing, has to be pre-nominal. Most adjectives in Italian are post-nominal, but in the next presentation, we'll see that things are much more complicated, but can be ordered in a very neat way, I think. But here, this kind of adjective must come in with an instruction to block the raising of the progressive type, which in Italian brings the nominal above the adjectives, so that the adjective remains to the left of the, that's the only position that it can have. And of course, one can see immediately some generalization. So these lexical instructions can be given to single lexical items, but they can also be given to subclasses. So for example, in Italian, nationality adjectives necessarily follow the noun. So you cannot have them preceding the noun, as in English, for example, or in Russian. So here is the whole subclass of nationality adjectives that has to have this instruction by which the mode of piping must be progressive. And in 40, you see a minimal pair. This is a Romance variety, but because of the closeness with Croatian, it has some morphology that is Slavic. And the same adjective, Taliansky or Talian, comes in two different guises, two different functions. One with the Slavic morphology, and it has to precede. And the other is with the Romance morphology, and it has to follow. Now, a child that learns the language does not know that, possibly does not need to know that Taliansky is of Slavic origin, and as most Slavic languages, these adjectives precede, whereas in most Romance languages, nationality adjectives follow. So it has to learn that depending on the adjective, one precedes and the other follows. And the same is true of the Cypriot Maronite Arabic, which has both adjectives of Greek origin and adjectives of Arabic origin. And Arabic adjectives, like the one in 41a, have to follow, like in Arabic. Whereas the adjectives that are Greek origin, like in 41b, can either precede or follow. So again, they have to be put in two different classes, whether the child discovers that one is a Greek origin and the other is an Arabic origin or not. They have to be put in different classes. And the same is true, for example, in English with this special class of adjectives that have been studied that can only be postnominal. Then again, they have to enter a particular class that forces a type of movement that makes them postnominal. Then you also find this lexicon instruction being given to an entire class of adjectives. For example, in Persian, all adjectives follow the nominal, whatever their subclass is, except when they are superlatives. But we know that the position of superlatives is a very high position, and they are found pre-nominally. But otherwise, they're all postnominal. And then you have languages like Bulgarian and Russian, where not only all adjectives, but also all other modifiers in the, except for very few in Russian, I think, exceptional adjectives that can be post-nominal, but everything is pre-nominal. And that's also a generalization of this lexicon instruction, so that the child has to learn that the whole of the adjectives have this instruction, the whole of the numerals, the whole of the demonstratives, and so on. And then you get to the limiting case, the opposite limiting case of the enough type, namely Japanese and Korean, where all heads and modifiers within the extended projection have this regressive piping that we saw, except for few inconsistencies. For example, numerals can follow, not necessarily, in Japanese, which is unexpected, and so for some other small. As I said earlier, and then I'm coming close to end, you also have a case where it's the attractee that determines the order. So, for example, if you take Swedish, adjectives can take their complements, non-prepositional complements, either to the left, that's 42, or to the right, that's 43, or there are other adjectives that can take them either to the left or to the right. So the child has to learn where to, and here is the adjective that determines the ordering of these complements. The following case, it's quite rare, but there are cases where even certain classes of nouns determine the order in which the adjectives occur. So in this Australian language at 45, according to the description of the language by its author, if you have a human noun, then adjectives follow. If you have a non-human noun, then adjectives precede. This is a very rare case, and I don't know of any case where different verbs or verb classes determine the position of adverbs. For example, I don't know, stative verbs take adverbs to their right, and achievement verbs take them to their or even a single verb takes the complement to the left or to the right. So that remains to be seen whether there are any such cases, but that may be interesting if it never happens. That's the case. With the other phrases, this is possible. So if you look at 46, then certain prepositions take their complements to the right, and other prepositions in this mischief, this mixed language, take complements to the left. In German, you have some prepositions that allow both positions, like nach. Then if you turn the page, you have languages where some modals precede the verb, 49a, and some other modals follow the verb. So here it's the modal that seems to determine the ordering. And in Persian, depending on the type of auxiliary, the auxiliary can follow, as in a well-behaved head final language, but it can also, another type of auxiliary precedes the verb. So, and complementizer also are found either preceding, and Bangla is one case that shows both types of initial complementizer, 51A, and final complementizer, 51B, which are of the verbal type complementizer, typically those that follow in a head final language. So then it is plausible then, let me try to conclude this long tour, but I think we can reconcile a lexical microparametric approach both with the problem of acquisition that I was hinting at earlier, and with the tendencies for intra and cross-category harmony that we also saw. So, for example, it is plausible that the child is guided by a default assumption, namely that once the lexical category is attracted in one of the two ways that we saw, by one of the two types of pipe piping, then it will continue to be attracted in the same mode up to this confirmation. So if it has this default expectation, then the facts will tell him or her that he has to change expectations when he sees that at some point modals don't behave the same as lexical verb, they behave differently. And ultimately, the language internal generalization will have to be fixed down to the most minute details. So for example, we know that in rigid head final languages, a title follows a proper name. So you say Chomsky professor, you don't say Professor Chomsky. And a common noun follows a proper noun. So you say the Edo River, you don't say the river Edo. In Hebrew, you have exactly the opposite. That's the mirror image. So you say Professor Chomsky. And you have the common noun preceding the proper noun. So you have the river, the Jordan, not the Jordan, the river. In English is mixed because the title has to precede. So you say Professor Chomsky, Lady Windermere, but proper names and common nouns seem to behave in an incoherent way, because there are some cases where the common noun follows, like Washington Square or Auburn Mountain, 54A. In other cases, the proper name follows and the common noun precedes. You say Cape Canaveral, not Canaveral Cape. And there are cases where you can choose. You can say Mississippi River or the River Mississippi. So it's exactly as we saw with the prepositions. So any microparametric approach to word orders then will have to reconcile these two opposite ways of behavior in the various languages, namely those that are incoherent, disharmonic, and those that we saw are harmonic to at least a certain extent, and this can perhaps be done, possibly be done, adding some costs to the way the word orders are actually implemented, that are actually constructed. So I stop here, and thank you for bearing this patience, because it was a little bit of a